Hello, good morning or good afternoon based on where you all are. My name is Kate Chance. I am the Interfaith Coordinator for an organization in the Bay Area called Islamic Networks Group. We've been around since 1993 and we have been working to combat stereotypes against American Muslims through both education and interfaith engagement. And part of our work in interfaith is with the Know Your Neighbor campaign, which was launched in 2015 under the Obama administration and is now focusing more on grassroots efforts to promote interfaith work and interfaith engagement. So there are over 30 interfaith organizations nationally that are involved with Know Your Neighbor, including Shoulder to Shoulder, which is on the call, and the Islamic Center of Greater Cincinnati, which is also on this webinar. So we are doing similar projects as to this one to promote and share different ideas within the interfaith world nationally and help get these ideas out to others who might be interested in them. So one of the most popular events right now is the Meet a Muslim campaign, or similar ways and similar events to combating Islamophobia through interfaith engagement. So a large problem that we're facing right now are the negative views of Muslim Americans in our country. And so we're hoping to find ways to help combat those stereotypes and improve Americans' understandings of Islam and American Muslims. So one of the ways statistically proven to break down these stereotypes is through personal engagement and through conversation. So we're going to discuss some of the ways that people are changing the way Americans view Muslims and Islam. So there are several different ways in which this is being done. One of the methods is through Meet a Muslim campaign, which we have Mona Haidar and Moina Shaikh, who will be explaining what they do with these campaigns. Another method is through open mosque forums. So it's similar to an open house where people invite the community in and the community can ask questions about Islam and American Muslims. And Shakila Ahmad will be discussing her work with that with the Islamic Center of Greater Cincinnati. And another method in which we are combating stereotypes is through allyship. So having Christian, Jewish, and other faith traditions stand alongside the Muslim communities. So Catherine Orsborn of the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign will be discussing that for a little bit. So first, I would like to ask both Moina and Mona to talk about their work with Meet a Muslim campaign. So we will start with Moina. Moina has actually trademarked the term Meet a Muslim, but I think she still wants everybody to use it and wants to help advance the campaign. So we will have her talk for a few minutes about her work.
Thank you so much, Kate, for organizing this. So I've been involved in interfaith work for the past, I would say, 17, 18 years. And every time we hold an interfaith event, it's always preaching to the choir, the same faces all the time. So when San Bernardino happened, I started thinking, what can I do to get to those people who don't come to these interfaith events? And that's when just this thought came to my mind that I will put an ad in the paper and go sit in a coffee shop and see if somebody shows up. But I put some phrases in that ad. I put some questions. First, I said, no question is off the table. I won't be offended by any question. And then I put some questions like, what is the difference between Shia and Sunni? Why are women oppressed in Islam? What is Sharia law? Just those all hot topic questions. I put it in the ad. And I just, went to the coffee shop. I thought I'll take my laptop. A few people might show up. The first event drew over 100 people. It was overwhelming. And the town that I live in, I have been very active here. So most of the active people I know. And over at the coffee shop, 99% of the people were new. I had never met them. I have never seen them. So it just reinforced that people are thirsty to learn about Islam. They want to know. They just need to find a platform where they can come. And so that's how I got started.
Thank you, Moina. I would like you to briefly talk about some tips that you might have for those who are interested in having similar programs or similar outreach to their community.
So we have also, since 9/11, we have been doing open house at our mosques. And again, it's always the same people. So that's always a dilemma, how to reach out to these people. So I would say to reach out through your interfaith networks, start going to the churches. So now, after my first event, which was in last January, I have done 56 events so far. And now it's more like I'm getting invited to schools, colleges, service clubs, retirement facilities, churches, synagogues. So the word is spreading, and now it's not so many public events, it's more like private events. Even people are inviting me into their homes where they would invite their family and friends to come and have a conversation. And it's very informal. I tell them that I'm not a scholar, I'm a very lay person, and just, have a conversation.
Thank you, Moina.
Mhm.
So now we are going to ask Mona and her husband Sebastian to talk about their efforts in the Meet a Muslim campaign. They have become really prominent on social media for their work, engaging the community, for standing outside in the rain, the cold, the snow, with donuts and coffee for people to come and talk to them in the community, and help engage them and help build their understandings of the Muslim community.
Great. I think I'll start. Thanks so much for having us on, and hello, everyone. My name is Sebastian, and I just want to talk a little bit about how the genesis of our project and how it's evolved. Similar, this started in late 2015, right after San Bernardino and the Paris attacks. Like a lot of people, we just felt very affected, depressed, afraid to leave our house. And can everybody hear me okay, by the way? Okay. And we had this sensation of waiting for somebody to do something to not only address the grief, but the intense negative backlash that was occurring after the event, the governor's closing borders and all the rest, and the increase in hate crimes. So we just had this, after about a month of feeling helpless, had this sort of whimsical idea that we initially didn't even take seriously ourselves, which is just to put ourselves out there. Basically bribed people to talk to us by giving away donuts and coffee and having a big sign. And we thought we might go out for a few hours on the first day, and it just really snowballed from there and became this thing that I think was of benefit to other people, but for us was initially this great healing balm for ourselves to really connect. And that was really what's missing after these tragedies, is this sense of isolation that I think everybody feels on both sides. Everybody feels alone. So it was this very powerful way of connecting. It really lit a fire. We got a lot of nice media attention for it, and that really helped encourage us to do more events, and similar, to be invited into classrooms and universities, because I'm sure most people know the statistics that a majority of Americans have a negative view about Muslims and Islam, and a majority of Americans have never met a Muslim, have never talked to a Muslim. And so our intention was to try to decrease those statistics a little bit by giving them at least some contact with the two of us. We felt very strongly from the beginning that we did not want this to be an Islamic education event per se. We did not want to go out and educate about Islam, and we didn't even necessarily want to talk about Islam if that's not what people were interested in talking about. It was really, like the sign said, talk to a Muslim, or as somebody suggested, talk to a human being who happens to be a Muslim. That really encapsulated the whole intention of our project. Talk to a human being. This happens to be our practice. This happens to be what prayer looks like for us. But we didn't even necessarily encourage people to talk to us about Islamic questions per se, but to talk to us about life and about movies and food and school and your kid. And we did it in front of a library, so we talked about books and free speech and all of these things. And that was really, I think, much more effective. Questions about Islam obviously came up, and we answered those, and those could be opportunities for conversation. But the real intention was a heart-to-heart human connection with someone that you might think as different, that you might perceive as being different because of how they dress, or in the case of me, someone that you might perceive to be Christian, but who is practicing this other faith, and so to kind of challenge some of those stereotypes. And so that's really the heart space we went into it with, and continue to do.
We were really just interested in being neighborly more than anything else, and just creating community and healing around a tragic and horrific event where people could come together and share their wounds and share their pain and transform it into connection, because we know that when people gather in those intentions, that we can transform our pain and our suffering into community and connection. That's one of the magical things about being human beings. It's one of the great mysteries of our world, right? When human beings get together, these things just happen. So for us, like Sebastian said, it just was never about our theology or our religion per se. It was just about being with people and being with people in a beautiful way, that in a way that represented us.
Thank you, Mona and Sebastian. So to everybody watching this webinar, if any of you ever have any questions for the panelists or questions that you hope for us to answer during the Q&A session, please be sure to go to the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen and submit any questions that you might have, and we'll try to address them. We are also going to put together different resources from the different panelists that we have here today and send them out to you. So if you have any questions for different resources or different ideas, please send them to us. And you can also use the chat room to tell us a bit about yourself or where you are. And so we have somebody who asked, I believe, where Mona and Sebastian met. So if you guys could briefly tell us about where you met.
We met on my birthday almost 5 years ago on a mountaintop in northern New Mexico.
Well, that's an adorable story.
More details to follow.
So now we are going to talk briefly about open mosque forums. And so we have Shakila here to talk about her work with the Islamic Center of Greater Cincinnati. She has been helping to host open mosque forums for quite some time. So I will let her talk a bit about her experience.
Great, thank you, Kate, and welcome everyone. The Islamic Center of Greater Cincinnati, a little bit different from the previous two speakers, is an institution that's engaged in this very important work. But, the essence is as both of the previous speakers talked about, it's that human connection that we feel has been missing and is still missing in order for us to really build understanding as fellow Americans, regardless of what faith we are. I happen to be a Muslim who is the president and board chair for the Islamic Center, but I'm a committed Cincinnatian. I do a lot of other philanthropic work and social service work and community work, and so it's really important for all of us to understand all of the different aspects. So the Islamic Center is an ING Speakers Bureau, but even before that, we did open houses and guided tours. We have a beautiful facility, very unique, probably I would say arguably the most beautiful in the Northern Hemisphere, and I'll send Kate a PowerPoint to give a glimpse of the activities. But we've always had an open house and guided tours, and since the center opened about 21 years ago, we've had over 80,000 visitors that have come through the center. But, for the most part, there were institutions. We would have open house families and such. But back in November, as ING kicked off the Know Your Neighbor campaign, we felt like we needed to do something a little bit more, even more open and more welcoming, and try to reach diverse audiences. That, we would get different people every time, but we felt like there was a huge segment of the population that wasn't having the opportunity to connect. And so we joined the Know Your Neighbor campaign, and, subtaglined as I Am American, and really opened up the open house tours through various other channels. So it was community organizations, interfaith groups, much more personal social media outreach than we had done before. Before it was more institution and institution to institution and general, press releases and such. But I think people, as as the couple was saying, they were grieving themselves, and they wanted an opportunity to be able to share their feelings while understanding others and building. So we basically reached out the Know Your Neighbor campaign for this Meet the Muslim events. And so I will say is that the first one drew about 350 people back in November. Then we thought, okay, we're going to continue this. And we added elements such as us breaking bread together. So in addition to a guided tour, we allowed people to observe prayer, because a lot of people just have a lot of questions. What do Muslims do at a mosque? What does it look like? And allowing them to connect their own way of spirituality with the way that their Muslim neighbors were worshiping. So, the guided tour element, the observing prayer element, and then really a breaking bread together, where our community members generously donated, diverse ethnic foods. So we would have dessert, coffee, chai, and really allow people to sit and then at small tables and have those coffee shop conversations. But do it, we have a facility that allows us to do that. So it allowed us to really engage with people that majority of whom had never been to the mosque before, had not really met Muslims. Some of my colleagues from, CEOs of nonprofits and civic and community leaders came to these things because they themselves wanted to show their support. And so the next two had a couple of hundred. This last one, we had over 650 people. So we're going to have another one in March, and, we're continuing to do the guided tours in between, but are doing the Know Your Neighbor, Meet a Muslim with Breaking Bread together every month on the first Saturday afternoon of the month, and then allowing people to have other opportunities. Our media partners have been very instrumental in the sense that the interfaith work we're doing has to be known by others to give people an inspiration to realize that, what, I can take the leadership in this. I can do this. Our civic and community leaders, we had a township trustee that led a circle of friendship around the mosque the last time that we had. And so for those individuals to be visible is so important and critical, as well. And then just various different neighborhood groups and organizations have been engaged in different ways. And so where we can be out there as a community to be with other people that are showing support is something that we've really focused and promoted, in addition to allowing people to come into our space and be a part of our experience and really build those personal relationships that we hope will just last beyond that particular visit. And then they themselves have been the biggest advocates of having their family, their neighbor, their colleague, other people to be able to come and experience this.
Thank you, Shakila. There are really great tips in there. I really like the media engagement and also engaging the community to be involved. I think those are really important elements to events like this. So now I would like to talk about allyship and how other faith communities can stand alongside the Muslim community. So we are going to turn the floor over to Catherine, who is the campaign director for Shoulder to Shoulder, so she can talk about her work with this campaign.
Great. Thanks so much, Kate. And it's been really awesome to hear from the other folks on this webinar so far about all the great stuff that's happening. So Shoulder to Shoulder, just to give a little background here, we were founded in 2010 as a response to the rising anti-Muslim bigotry seen in the public square in America. And so that was when the so-called Ground Zero Mosque controversy was going on. There was the pastor in Florida threatening to burn the Quran. There was the fight over the mosque in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And there were just a lot of things sort of bubbling up around the same time that really gave this sense of a lot of national negativity towards Islam and towards the American Muslim community. And so in response to that, a number of different faith denominations, Christian and Jewish denominations in particular, along with religious organizations and interfaith organizations at the national level, decided to come together in a show of solidarity. And really to frame this as, that when the American Muslim community is being attacked, that's an attack on American religious pluralism. And it's an attack that affects all religious communities, because if any of us aren't free to be who we are in the United States as people of faith and as religious communities, then really none of us have access to that freedom. And so that was really the message of the national gathering that formed Shoulder to Shoulder. And from there, they decided to go ahead and consolidate it into a campaign, an ongoing campaign for other religious communities to be actively working to stand up for the rights of American Muslims, to do that in very specific ways, and to really continue to work to engage faith communities. So it started with 20 different national denominations, and now we're up to 34 and always growing. But the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops is part of it, the Union for Reform Judaism, a number of the Protestant denominations. And so our work with them happens both in sort of internal and external ways. So we know that there's a lot of work to do inside non-Muslim religious communities. If you look at the data on people's perceptions of Muslims and Islam in the United States, it's not looking so good inside Protestant Christian communities, for instance. And so part of the work of the campaign is that our institutions have joined this at the national level, but they know there's so much work to be done within with their clergy and within their congregations. And so we help to facilitate a lot of that work. And then there's also the external work of standing in public witness, in multi-faith solidarity when there are attacks on the American Muslim community. So sometimes that looks like political engagement. For instance, on the executive orders and those sorts of things, making sure that that faith communities are informed and are speaking up to elected officials, speaking into the hearings and those sorts of things. And then our work is also on the national level. That's a lot of what our work looks like. But then we have a number of community-based organizations that are part of Shoulder to Shoulder that do this work in local communities around the country. And those are autonomous organizations. We didn't start any of them. We helped form a couple. But for the most part, these are organizations that are, take different forms and that are in some way focused on the issue of anti-Muslim bigotry as one of their key pieces of work that they're doing in their local community. And so we work with them to help expose them to best practices and models of programs that might be worth trying in their communities, to participate sometimes in collaborative national campaigns, all that sort of stuff. And so everybody has already mentioned that we know that knowing a Muslim drastically increases people's perceptions of them positively. But we have demographic challenges with this. The reality is that American Muslims are a very small percentage of the population, and if you're outside of an urban center, then it can be very difficult to figure out how to make that happen. And I think, there are layers of the roles that non-Muslim faith communities can play in this, but I think, looking at those demographic realities, that's one of the places that non-Muslim faith communities really have to step it up and make space and create platforms for other people who maybe wouldn't show up to meet a Muslim event to hear from Muslims. So whether that's a clergy person making space in a Sunday school class, or other ways of making that happen when you have a captive audience that an American Muslim could not as easily get. But I think that when we think about solidarity, it feels like it's really a dance between taking action, taking public action, speaking up, politically engaging, while also building those relationships with American Muslims. You can't really be, I don't think you can be the best ally that you can be if you don't have those relationships, so that you're hearing from the community directly, and you're able to really to think through that and to work with American Muslim partners. So we have a best practices document that Kate, I think, is going to send around after the webinar, talking about the importance of starting and ending with listening as a really important practice for allies. But then diving in, engaging in uncomfortable spaces, because that's how relationship building goes, and learning to do the work as you go. But then listening for when you misstep, because it's going to happen, and that's an important part of the process. But I also just wanted to share one example of an event and sort of series of events that we've been involved in that were good examples and opportunities of being able to engage in this sort of relationship building. And so we've for a long time been involved in interfaith iftars during Ramadan, and Ramadan's coming up. I mean, we still are a while off, but it's never too early to start thinking and preparing. So it'll be starting at the end of May this year. And last year, instead of doing an interfaith panel at the Ramadan event that we did, we decided to do it a little bit differently. And so Shoulder to Shoulder partnered with a couple of local Muslim organizations and with a mosque community to make sure that there was an imam involved. And we decided to host it at a church, and we made sure that the Muslim communities involved were good with that, and made sure that in the prayer space there weren't like massive crosses hanging over the prayer space or something, and thinking through those things. But held it in a church, and instead of having a interfaith panel, we had a panel of 4 young American Muslims from different backgrounds and experiences talking to the crowd very briefly in sort of talk show style conversation about their own experiences of practicing Ramadan in America, in a place where most likely a lot of your neighbors are not doing that. And it was an awesome event. There were opportunities afterwards for people to be engaging with each other at their tables over the meal and stuff like that. But we heard a lot of good feedback from people who had been to a lot of interfaith iftars, but never one where it was like really focused on just hearing from young American Muslims about their own experiences. And so out of that, we put together a document for kind of how to host an interfaith iftar, and that churches and synagogues could use. And of course, the first step in that is partnering with a local Muslim organization so that you make sure you're following, that you're not going to do anything that's going to like totally mess with the flow of an iftar. But really putting together some of the things you need to think through, and asking non-Muslim faith partners to give the Muslims a break for an evening, and to be the ones who host the iftar. And that was a way also of getting people who maybe wouldn't have come if it was at a mosque to be able to come and experience it. So that's something that we've helped coordinate in the past, and we're going to be this year helping to coordinate kind of collecting. We know that there are interfaith iftars happening all over the country all the time during Ramadan, and so helping to build a database of when and where those are happening, so that people who are not Muslim who are looking to engage in one can find it. So that's something just to keep on your radars as a really good time of the year to really connect with American Muslims. So I'll be happy to respond to any questions, but just wanted to share a little bit about some of the work we're doing and what allyship looks like in that space. And somebody asked about regional Shoulder to Shoulder in New Jersey and New York, and we do have partners in both of those places that I'd be happy to connect you with. As I said, our regional partners are autonomous organizations doing work in this space. So in New York, that's the Interfaith Center of New York that we work most closely with, but I'll be glad to connect you with our folks there.
Thank you, Catherine. I have 2 things I want to follow up on. First is she mentioned a man in Florida attempting to burn Qurans, and that's actually the town where I'm from, my hometown. So my other point would be it can be really hard to be an ally from another faith tradition, especially if you don't have a full understanding of different religious traditions, or especially Islam, and trying to be an ally for the Muslim community. And I really like the work that Shoulder to Shoulder is doing. I wrote a really brief article on how to be an ally, especially as a Christian, so I'm going to send that out as well. But now I would like to open up for Q&A and ask our panelists a few questions. My first question is, what is the most difficult question somebody has asked you during one of your events about either the Muslim community or just a question in general that you've received?
So I guess I'll go first. So I think the difficulty people are having understanding is the radicalization. What is causing educated people, especially in the West, to join ISIS or to become radicalized? So that's one of the questions that I get asked over and over. And no matter what I say, sometimes I feel that I can see on people's faces that they're not getting it. They're not understanding what is causing all of that. So because it's not an easy answer, it's a very complex issue. So that is, I think, one of the very challenging questions that I feel it's hard to help people understand it.
I'm happy to go next. I think for me, the most common question is similar. It's sort of the flip side of the coin. And it's a question that basically said, why aren't more Muslims speaking out against terrorism? And this is certainly one of the myths that's perpetuated in the media, the silence of the Muslim community in response to these horrific events that we're seeing. And for me, what's difficult about that question is not getting overreacting, right, and not getting defensive, because of course you'd be hard pressed to find any Muslim organization, any Islamic center, any mosque, any school that has not categorically condemned every attack of terrorism that's happened in the United States or worldwide. But these are not newsworthy events, right? These are not things that are being publicized, and so it's very hard to convince people that there is something out there that they can't see, that well, that this is happening, and the reason you're not seeing it is very complex, and you end up sort of sounding like a conspiracy theorist when you talk about the media domination and the size of the megaphone and the volume of their speakers, and I think one thing that's important to come back to if you're doing one of these events is to kind of bring the conversation back to the intimate. That as you said, Sister Moina, that we went out of our way to not present ourselves as experts. We are two people who happen to be Muslim who are doing this event. We are not scholars. We are not experts, and so encouraging people to keep the conversation small. Well, ask us what we think of these events, ask us how we responded to these events, ask us how our community is responding, not to get into this complex 50-year foreign policy of war and sanctions and, you know, Middle East. I mean, this is just, you're never gonna get anywhere, you're never gonna win that conversation, but to say, gosh, I as a human being grieved because lives were lost, period. Doesn't matter who the perpetrator was, and it doesn't matter who the victim was. Lives were lost, and then there's this whole ripple effect of backlash and consequence that happened after that. Yeah, that question is a challenging one, but I think the challenge is to keep it back to like we are two people, and I happen to be a Muslim, and let's just keep it there, because I think that's where the real, you know, alchemy and connection and intimacy can happen.
Shakila, do you have a comment?
Yes, I was muted myself. So I think all of these questions have been raised multiple times, and and I think you have to share both the personal experiences as well as national, international experiences, and in terms of Muslims speaking out, or being able to show in terms of the mass categorization of radicalization of 1.6 billion people versus what it truly might be, and that Islam is not exclusive to that. I mean, it's something that it's important to understand has happened throughout the history of time with all faith traditions. But the couple of questions that I've gotten, especially a lot more recently, is that I work with a lot of different organizations, and as a voice for women's empowerment and empowerment of minorities. And the question that I got recently was, you know, my friends, this is someone asking me, is that people that I know ask me, how can you, you know, be an advocate for Muslims if Muslims are subjugating women and persecuting, you know, people of the LGBT community. And so, you know, and I really, first of all, thank the person for asking that question and really talked about how the heritage of Islam really is empowering women and allowing women to be in leadership roles. And I'm just one small example. There have been throughout, you know, the history of time in this country and elsewhere. And then in regards to the LGBT community, it's really important for us to understand is that, you know, we all have different place where we are in terms of our religious beliefs and our practices, but in no way does that allow us to persecute other people because of their beliefs, and no way does, you know, do we condone that. And so where it is that we can be supportive of other minority communities and be a voice for them, as we would very much are seeing is that their voice for us. So building the relationships across our differences in order to really be advocates for people who are not having an effective voice out in the larger population. Amina, are you saying something?
Oh, sorry, we were just talking about something briefly. Catherine, do you have a question or that somebody has asked you that's been difficult? Or one of the organizations you've helped with events?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's similar to everyone else. I think right now in the political and media context we're living in, certainly the questions around extremism and how that fits into Islam and Muslim life, those are always difficult questions because I think that Sebastian made an important point that, you know, you need to take that back to the personal, to the intimate, and you know, have conversations where you're able to both address maybe the global context in some way. I think that, you know, there have to be opportunities to have those conversations about why things are the way they are, but that really, you know, having the conversations with individuals, you know, I identify as Christian, and I'm not asked to answer for instance, Christians in Uganda lobbying against LGBT people. You know, that's just people have counterexamples to that. And I think that when people don't have counterexamples that they can readily recall about Muslims, then it's very easy to just sort of accept and swallow some of the media narratives whole. And so, you know, pointing that out, I think can be helpful for some people. But I do think that the relational is really where you're going to get past that, because sometimes, you know, people are entering these situations with such high emotions that it can be really hard to have a conversation that's about facts when really that's often, unfortunately, not going to get many of us anywhere. I mean, that's not true for everyone, for sure, but I think that's a trend that we've been seeing. And so I would just echo, you know, that some of those same questions and yeah, I mean, I have lots of these conversations with, and, you know, I'm not Muslim, but because I do the work that I do, I have relatives, for instance, where when I'm sitting around the kitchen table with them, I'll start getting bombarded with all sorts of questions. And I think it's tough, but just, you know, I think this is another role that allies can really, maybe sometimes take some of the heat off of Muslims who are constantly having to answer some of these questions and point out some of the flaws in where the questions are coming from, or turning it around and saying, what would it look like to you if Muslims were speaking out effectively against extremism? What would you need to see to believe that? Okay, well, what you just said, it exists. You know, those sorts of things, I think can be helpful to sort of turn it around and answer difficult questions with other questions that probe into where their information is coming from and how they're approaching it.
So can I add to that? What I have noticed at my events is when my friends that are the allies, they sometimes draw parallels when I'm trying to make a point and people are not understanding. Like I remember one time I talked about KKK, I drew parallels with ISIS, and somebody said, but KKK doesn't exist anymore. At that point, a friend of mine who's a nun, she stood up and she said, what are you talking about? What world are you living in? They are very much in existence. So that was very powerful, because coming from me, I'm biased and, you know, all those labels I have, but coming from someone of your own, it is very powerful and it helps people understand.
Thank you. My next question for you all would be, what is the biggest obstacle for you all in hosting events like this? It can be logistical, it can be anything related to just difficulty with coordinating events like this.
Well, I don't know if I would call it an obstacle, but a necessity, I think, is imperative. And so, you know, for those people who are listening, is that, you know, the essential element of this is that we have partners that are outside the Muslim community that are able to help get it to those who we are not able to reach. So, you know, whether it's institutionally within the Jewish community, we've been very active with Muslim Jewish dialogue, as well as, you know, Muslim Jewish Christian, and then more broader interfaith dialogue. So, you know, those people, those partners being able to reach individual populations and groups and segments who otherwise would never seek it out is absolutely essential. And where we don't have success is, I think, when we don't have those partnerships and we're not able to leverage those partnerships in our own region. And then, of course, that gets magnified at the national level.
Does anybody else have any difficulties or obstacles they've had to overcome in coordinating events like this?
I mean, I'd just like to say, I think we're living in a time where the obstacles seem insurmountable. I think anybody who's on the side of resistance and progress and goodness, you know, right now is probably feeling like the gulf between where we are and where we want to be is infinite. So I actually think that one of the biggest obstacles is just our own agency and our own feeling that we who am I? I am one person. I'm nobody. I'm up against this horrific government and this terrible atmosphere that we're in. And that was certainly where Mona and I were 15 months ago, post San Bernardino in Paris. And of course, things are much worse now. But I think just overcoming this idea that we are one person. And to do these small things, and I love the idea that allyship and partner have become kind of part of our lexicon now for Muslims and non-Muslims alike. And I just want to encourage everybody who's on this webinar to say that it doesn't matter how old you are, whether you're partnered or part of an organization or just kind of freelance people like Mona and myself. You can do something, and whether that's making eye contact with someone on the subway. We live in New York, so subway is part of our life, just to let them know that you have their back if things feel sketchy, to standing up, to not letting the joke go uncountered, or whether it's something more kind of foolish, like putting a bullseye on your head and saying, I am a Muslim, come talk to me, right? There's a whole gradation of kind of risks that we can take. And I would say, you know, there is nothing too small, and it's just that, again, coming back to this word that we keep using, intimacy and connection, to create that every day, I think is really gonna get us through the next 4 years, maybe less than 4 years if we're lucky, and help us regain our sanity and feel some sense of humanity.
So from my end, I wouldn't say it's an obstacle, but I'm facing challenge where people are not forthcoming to join my effort. I mean, I don't want to be there by myself. Initially, I had a sister and a brother who joined, but both of them, because of their work commitments, they're not able to. It's always good to have more than one perspective. And when you're talking to a whole bunch of people, I mean, I'm always answering the way I feel, but it's good to have other voices heard, different gender, different age groups. So that's my challenge here.
I'd say from some of the work we've been involved in, I wouldn't call them obstacles, but maybe a couple of the challenges that we've faced. I mean, one is getting people there who maybe wouldn't naturally normally come. You know, if we have the same people showing up to interfaith events all the time, I think that can be valuable for building that solidarity and the deep relationships among the people who are showing up, and sort of bolstering them for the work. So it's not invaluable to have those, but really thinking about how that conversation reaches people who really need to be reached. So that's always a challenge, as well as, I mean, when I'm thinking about putting together some of these events, how to help represent American Muslims and American Islam in its diversity. So trying to make sure that we don't have, you know, panelists all from the same backgrounds, or, and, you know, looking at gender, ethnicity, race, different types of practice and levels of practice and those sorts of things, really trying to give people a sense of diversity. But like, obviously in one event, it can be difficult to do that. So, and sometimes it's about just like making sure you're taking the time to think through things instead of throwing together events very quickly and going to the people that you know are going to say yes and those sorts of things. But I think that can be a challenge, particularly when interfaith partners are organizing, that you don't always have the same one Muslim speaker and that person be an imam. It should, you know, that's important to hear from an imam, but it's really, really important to hear from other portions of the American Muslim community. So thinking through that can be challenging, just because I think it takes more work, but it's good work.
Thank you. So we are going to take a question from Saham, and they asked, what are proper places to suggest to bring neighbors to have these conversations and bring them together other than coffee shops? So does anybody have a suggestion of a place to hold events like these?
So I chose a coffee shop to begin with because it was a neutral place. Because like I said, we have been doing open houses at our mosque since 9/11. And I feel that if you offer a neutral place, people are more accepting. They're like, you know, they're more comfortable to come. And that's why I started doing it at a coffee shop. But again, like now lately, I've been doing it at churches and other places as well. So I feel where there's a captive audience, if you approach them, it's easier that way for you, especially because gathering people is not easy. I mean, that's a challenge all the time to have a good crowd. So if your neighbor, church community, or synagogue or whatever that you have relationship with at one of their events or something, if you approach them to hold your thing, I think that would be good.
I think one of the unique things that I've been involved in is, and it doesn't have to be, it just happens to be, I'm involved in two very different groups, but the same concept is that we have a women's interfaith network that is kind of neighborhood based. And so initially, a Catholic Church approached the Islamic Center, but the way that the group has been now active for over, I'd say almost 10 years, is meeting in homes as well as meeting in diverse places of worship. And so I think that's been very meaningful in terms of establishing relationships as well as furthering our knowledge. And then at least once a year, we do a diverse cultural program as well. The other method, again, sort of this concept of that relationship. I mean, that's the key. What we're all talking about is building those relationships that currently do not exist or are very fragile or based on misinformation. So the other is our Bridges of Faith Trialogue group is something that started as a Muslim-Jewish dialogue group, and couples met in each other's homes over the course of, once a month now, and then it was reinitiated as Muslim, Jewish, Christian dialogue group. And again, we meet predominantly in our homes. We quite often break bread together, but then really tackle complex issues that we're facing as a society and that require all of us, to be actively engaged in. So I think we shouldn't discount. I think we have to be careful about meeting in people's homes. It's a leap of faith to bring strangers into your home. But if a neighborhood organization exists, a book club, a women's discussion forum, then I think that's a great way. I've had many neighbors that have invited me into their homes with kind of their circle to allow to have that intimate setting.
I'll just say briefly, our work has, been literally on the streets and on the sidewalk. And, obviously the intention is to have conversations with people and have them stop and talk and kind of break bread over donuts and coffee. That we've called that kind of our little communion. But what I came to realize is that, a lot of people just walk by and wave and give a thumbs up, and cabbies honk, and they brings a smile to people's face. And I think you can't underestimate, spreading hope and kind of inspiration. And so that's been one of the things that I think has been powerful about this, is just being this person at a sign with my kind of setup and flowers and donuts and coffee, this kind of very performative act, just to give even a visual momentary boost to someone's day. And I've seen that has been very powerful. So that's been one nice thing about being so public. I mean, there's disadvantages as well, obviously, but that's been one nice element of that.
So we are running a little bit low on time, but we have one more question I'd like to address. And we have other questions that we don't have time for, but I'm going to ask our panelists to respond, and I will send out their responses to anybody attending this webinar afterwards with resources that you can use to host similar events. But this last question is a difficult one, but I think it's really important. And it's how, as a Muslim, our panelists continue holding these events and holding spaces for this dialogue without feeling triggered by racist or hateful remarks or questions.
Could you just repeat that, Kate? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question is, how, as Muslims, do you continue holding these events and continuing with the work you're doing despite the racist remarks you might hear or the Islamophobic or hateful questions or opinions?
Well, I'll just quickly give my perspective. It's very difficult. It's very painful. It's, sometimes overwhelming. I have young adult children, and I lose a lot of sleep, based on what I hear and what's projected onto myself, my community, my family. But the thing that keeps me going personally is that if I don't speak up for myself, who is it that's going to speak up? And if I want others to be a voice for justice and for fairness, is that then I have to take that initiative. And there is an element of risk and difficulty involved in that. But in a way, it's empowering to be able to do that. And I think once people see your example, then it's amazing, who else? And I would just encourage really, especially all the Muslims, to take a little bit of a chance and put themselves out there by allowing people to get them, get other people to know them.
So I'll share a story. I was doing a Meet a Muslim in Arizona in a small town. And the gentleman came and he said that he will slash my throat if I offended him. And he also said that he was armed with a knife. Now, you guys probably know that Arizona has an open carry law. So going there, I was concerned. I was on the edge, and I requested security at every place that I went. And luckily, there was a police officer there. And he came up and he asked me if we should let this guy stay or let him go. And I said, no, just let him stay. So, but that was an awe moment for me, being in America for so many years, never heard something so intense that somebody would say that they will slash my throat. So it's not easy work. It is challenging, very challenging at times. Sometimes people will just hijack your whole thing. I mean, I usually hold 1 hour events. One time this guy came and for 30 minutes, he kept on talking about Sharia law. He would not let go of it. I don't know what he wanted to hear, something that I wasn't saying to him. So, I mean, there are people who come with agenda, who just want to make their point and they want to hear certain things. So it is challenging. I wouldn't say it's easy work, but again, like Shakila said, we need to step up and we need to really put ourselves out and start doing. And I think what Mona and Sebastian is doing is beautiful. Just standing on a street corner with donuts and coffee. I think the most important thing is this one-on-one interaction, this personal connection, that people can just see you as regular human beings and not somebody out of this world.
Thank you for sharing that. And it hurts to hear stories like that. We've never had anything quite that intense happen in our booth. In other parts of our life, yes. But I just want to say two things. One, I think it's important that when there's pain, I think it's important to acknowledge it and acknowledge that these are very trying and very difficult times, not just for Muslims, that we are sort of in the spotlight, but that a lot of people are grieving. But I think the second piece is to be involved in work that is nourishing. And I think that was the big aha moment for Mona and I when we first did the booth, is how much it fed us. And so if you can have the fortune of being involved in work that is both effective at remediating some of the hatred, but also that's healing for yourself, that is what keeps you going. If you're doing work that leaves you defeated and depleted and more discouraged at the end of the day, I would encourage you not to do that work. You're not really going to be serving anybody. But if you're fed by those interactions and fed by that intimacy, that is what keeps you going and gets you out there the next day on your own time, on your own dime, to be vulnerable. And so I would just, for anybody looking to be an ally or to be involved, it has to be something that on some level is nourishing for you, or else it's probably not the right fit.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your responses. I'm actually going to turn the question now over to Amina. Amina is our content director here at ING, and we're also going to have her close with some information that is accessible to anybody about combating different stereotypes against Muslims and addressing different questions and concerns.
Good morning or good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum to all of you. I wanted to just respond briefly to my experience with this situation, because you will, in most situations, have at least one person who has come to the event with an agenda, maybe not even consciously, but they may have had something in their life, whether it was living in a country where they had a bad experience, being married to a Muslim. And so I think it's really important in those situations to, as was previously said, to respond with empathy, because there is an emotion that's behind all of this. And if you dismiss these person's concerns, they're going to, when you respond with empathy, you're going to disengage them, and you're going to kind of shift the emotions in the room. But the other thing is, it's very important to stay calm, because if you get upset, if you get angry, if it shows on your face, everyone's watching you. And it's really how you respond as much as what you say. And if the conversation continues and he's still going on for 30 minutes, I mean, that's the worst case scenario, I guarantee you the other audience members will make them stop. And you standing there, dignified, unemotional, empathetic, you will gain a lot of brownie points for doing that. So you need to really, before you go into these events, really ground yourself, whether you do dhikr, whether you do meditation, whether, whatever it takes to get you into that space where it's not about you and you're not going to take anything that's said personally. So I just wanted to end by showing you some of the resources we have online on our website, ing.org. If you can show them, we have a whole section on frequently asked questions about Islam and Muslims that are basically in 4 different sections. One of them is just general questions about Islam and Muslims that are actually based on questions that we've received over the last 24 years in the classroom, in churches, in synagogues. ranging from the very basic to, you know, what's this all about? What are the 5 pillars? What are the sources? To very complex questions about democracy, about modernity, about Sharia, crimes and punishments. So that is very valuable for both Muslims and allies who may be, as we mentioned, be asked questions about Islam and Muslims, and just to have that information. We also have a section, entire section on Sharia, talking about what is the nature of Sharia and the reality of the threat of Sharia here in the United States. And then we have a whole section on ISIS, going through a history of ISIS, and then it actually concludes with a response by 100 scholars on various issues where it's very clear that ISIS goes against the teachings of mainstream Islam. And then our most recent question is about Islamophobia, and it actually goes through a history of Islamophobia, some of the ways that Islamophobia is disseminated, and it has a lot of really great references, care reports, and other reports based on years of hate crimes. So all of these are resources that are very useful if you are engaged in this work and are going to be asked these questions. And these are all open. You don't have to be an educator to have access to them.
Thank you, Annette. And we are out of time, unfortunately, but I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today. They are all really powerful examples of interfaith work and trying to break down these stereotypes, especially against American Muslims. So I will be sending you an email shortly with this video that we can share with others, and hope to share our work with the greater American public. And also I will send all of you different resources that we talked about today and answer the different questions that we did not have time for. So I would really like to thank all of you for participating in this panel. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for organizing it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.